Judge Torres now has a new document in the SEC Ripple case that was filed by the SEC. The paper says that Ripple was given a $12.6 million fine. Several well-known people on social media have said they think the SEC wants to settle with Ripple, which is not true. In the civil fraud case, they agreed to pay a sum of $4.5 billion. 1. The SEC wants Terraform Labs and its former CEO, Donde, to pay $4.5 billion in civil fines and prejudgment interest to stop the case from going to court. 2. The New York judge, who is in charge of the case, still has to agree to the deal. Also, 3Quant and Terraform Labs would never again be able to buy or sell crypto asset stocks. Because of this, Ripple sent a new document to the SEC asking for a lower fine in the case involving the terrorist settlement. Their case is for a $10 million fine, but the SEC wants a fine of almost $2 billion. The $10 million number is not new. Neither is Ripple's case. The most important thing to remember is that Terraform will have to pay $420 million in fines and $358 billion to stop them from doing what they want to do as part of the planned consent order. This much is the same as about 1.27 times the defendant's $33 billion in sales. The SEC wants this amount because investors have directly told them they lost money. The suggested consent order also says that Terraform has to pay a $420 million civil penalty, which is about 1.7% of the defendant's $33 billion in sales. The most important thing to learn is that the SEC is asking for ridiculously high fines, and it's hard for anyone with half a brain to understand how big these fines are. Terraform Labs has to pay $420 million in fines, as the SCSCS draft consent order says, and $3.58 billion in penalties. The amount of money the defendants made in growth sales equals about 1.20 cents of his civil sentence. They also want Terraform to pay a $420 million civil penalty and $33 billion in sales by about 1.7 of the suspects. The SCSCSC has used direct witness evidence to show that investors lost money. As an end, it is now possible for the two companies to end their ongoing court battle because the SEC recently decided to settle with Ripple in the SEC Ripple case. Firms like Ripple are being punished harshly by the SEC, which shows that they are dedicated to protecting investors' interests and keeping the financial system honest. The Securities and Exchange Commission responded to defendant Ripple Labs' letter, which Ripple says supports its decision to deny the SEC's remedy motion. In the case of CC versus Terraform, the SEC is proposing a settlement that, according to Ripple, doesn't have much to do with how remedies are chosen in court. Because of these things, the SEC has said many times that the court has to accept the settlement under the rules. But as the SCSEC's remedies reply brief says, Ripple doesn't agree to any of this relief. The SEC says that Ripple is still doing things that are similar to what caused the violation in the first place. This makes it hard for the judge to say for sure if Ripple's current Odell sales are against the law. Bill Morgan, the lawyer for the XRP community member, says that the SEC is mad at Ripple for what it did and wants it to pay more than $2 billion. Since July 13, 2018, also known as XRP Victory Day, this has led to reports that Ripple is going to drop the $2 billion charges or settle with the SEC for $12.6 million. In the past year, the SEC's lawyers were unhappy with what Ripple did. Because of this, they think Ripple was overcharged in the first place and want them to pay more than $2 billion. Traders think that Ripple will soon pay the SEC $12.6 million in settlement, which will get rid of the $2 billion charges because they are not a fair way to figure out how much of a fine is needed to stop someone who is obviously very rich. That refuses to admit that it broke securities laws and keeps making money by doing illegally similar things. At first, the SEC's lawyers called them whiny because they don't agree with what Ripple is doing and are still upset about losing on July 13th, also known as XRP Victory Day, last year, which is shown by the fact that they want Ripple to pay more than $2 billion. They're so angry about this. In conclusion, the SEC has been criticized for being too hostile and scary in both its first answer to Ripple Labs' letter and its second response. Some people think that Ripple will settle with the SEC for $12.6 million, which is about $2 billion in charges because of what the SEC did. The summary talks about how silly it is that the SEC chose to pay Ripple $12.6 million, even though the company has been charged with breaking the Civil Penalties Act. The CC says the penalty is only 1.27% of gross sales, which is much less than the $10 million the company got in the CC's case. The CC wants a fine that is 20 times bigger than any other Bitcoin case they have looked into. The court has been told by Ripple. They back up this claim with evidence, and the SEC's lawyers replied to Judge Torres with a gimmick that most people would think doesn't support the statements they made. They didn't divide the $420 million settlement fine by the company's total income, which would have given them the 11.7 number they like to brag about. Judge Torres is being asked by the SEC to split the revenue by the company revenue that amounts to wrongdoing. The summary also stresses that the SEC's attempt was a meaningless math calculation and not a real comparison. In order to make a fair comparison between the amount of the penalty and the company's total gross income, in order to find out how the SAC usually punishes businesses, Ripple splits the fine amount into $1,000 in the company's total cash sales. Then, the same math is used for cases that are similar or even worse, more egregious cases. Ripple's acts show a pattern of typical SAC behavior, which is what they were meant to do. The summary then shows how silly Ripple is by saying that the fine should be split between the 5 bathrooms at their offices. The SEC then said that Judge Torres should split the $420 million fine by the number of bathrooms, which comes to 5. The proportion is found by multiplying the answer by 100, which gives $8.4 million for each bathroom. In short, the SAC's move to fine Ripple $12.6 million is seen as ridiculous and goes against the goals of the Civil Penalties Act. It is important to remember that the SAC's case is based on a comparison of like with like, and the summary doesn't explain why they made their decision. At the end of the report, it is pointed out how silly it was for the SAC to fine Ripple $12, which is only 1.27% of all sales. The closing of the summary stresses how important it is to understand the SEC's reasons and the possible effects of its actions. The random metric that uses the SEC suggested punishment for Ripple is meant to trick the judge into thinking that the punishment is fair and right or something less. The SEC chose to divide the $420 million fine by a smaller amount in order to get a bigger percentage. This is because they haven't used this method in any other lawsuits before. They used a smaller number to get a bigger percentage, so this claim doesn't make sense. The smaller number did use the bigger amount after all. If the SEC did this math on Ripple, they would correctly figure out that the company should pay a $10.02.6 million fine. That much money would be taken in dollars. Divide the answer by the $876.3 million amount asked for in the Ripple lawsuit and then multiply by 100 to get the figure you want. This is how you figure out numbers. It's the same amount as it was in the Terraform case. In this case, the SEC wants the court to tell Ripple it needs to pay a total of $1.95 billion in fines. This includes $876 million in civil penalties, $198 million in prejudgment interest, and $876 million in discouragement penalties. This is a lot more than the Terraform case. The math that the SEC should come up with its $12.6 million settlement offer is totally wrong. The CC doesn't say this should be done. The video is over. Thank them for commenting and liking the movie. It makes YouTube work better. Tell a lot of people about this movie to spread the word.